2311 Racing.
Yeah.
Tyler Reddick finished 6th in points. Bubba ends up P17. Now you go, wait a minute. Bubba made the playoffs. How could he be P17? You remember the 9 team made the playoffs. Bubba got the last spot and in driver-wise, but he did not get in owner-wise. So Bubba ended up finishing top 10 in driver points, but owner points he was P17. So it's a little bit weird, but we're going by owner points here. But Reddick, after, didn't we both pick him to be out in the first round of the playoffs?
Yeah, I believe that is correct, Jeff.
Yes. Because talk about a team we didn't trust. I mean, they had so many mistakes. They would show speed, but we're like, no, man, like how can you trust them? Something's always going wrong, pit crew wise or a mistake or whatever. But then they got in the playoffs, they put it together. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, all right. Yeah, he's making a run here. By the way, again, I'm not trying to do too many spoilers here. I hope people aren't going to get upset at this, but there's a moment in Full Speed where Alexa, his now fiance, is sitting in the motorhome watching Martinsville as Reddick's chance is slipping away. And she's telling the camera, she's like, I just want to grab him and shake him and tell him to effing drive through them. And, she's like, she just wants Reddick to run people over, and she says he's being too nice out there. I don't think that would have made a difference at Martinsville. Like, they just didn't have it. But is there something to you wanting to see more aggression from Reddick? Is there something where, do you think he's being too nice in a way or anything along those lines, Jordan?
Absolutely not. I don't think that's Tyler Reddick's issue at all. I mean, nice guys can finish first in the sport. Martin Truex Jr. is an example of that. I would say Chase Elliott's probably an example of that too, to some degree. Reddick's issue last year was not when you've got potentially winning race cars of not winning races, and not even that necessarily, not finishing in the top 5, not finishing in the top 10. They threw a ton of points away last year. He had a very, very good first year with 2311 Racing. That said, it could have been even better. And on the days when something happens, this team needs to show resiliency of, okay, that was a mistake. We are not going to let this snowball. We are not going to let this happen and compound itself where there's going to be a second and a third mistake. Remember Michigan last year? That kind of thing. That's what this team needs to do. It's not about Tyler Reddick being nice or, needs to be more aggressive. What he's doing works, and it's been working very well for him. It's just a matter of executing and turning the potentially great days, making sure that those turn into great days.
Yeah, I think he's still building, but I feel like pretty confident that he's going to be, just sort of a regular contender for quite a while. I don't know if he, some years they might put it all together. He might, win a championship maybe or get close. But I feel like even at a minimum, he's the kind of guy that gets the most out of the car. And if they can clean stuff up, as you said, they will just sort of be there and be sort of a constant presence. I think he's sort of established himself as someone who's going to be around. Bubba, I feel like, is more up and down. They put it together last year when they needed to. They made the playoffs. He advanced through a round of the playoffs. And you feel like, okay, like they've built progress. But then you also look at, I guess they had a better year overall than the year before, consistency-wise. But then I look at the year before when, he goes out and wins Kansas and dominates, and you're like, dang, he's really arrived now. And then they went winless last year. Yeah. So, what is missing there? I mean, it's odd because his average finish went from 18.3 in 2022 to 15.9. So he was finishing races way better. He had 9 more lead lap finishes last year than the year before. But his other stats were the exact same. 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s, 1 pole. Exact same. So you're still feeling like, Bubba's got to make the next step or, put the consistency and those flashes of speed together, because then he could be a real contender. But it just seems like they're still in the building process to me.
To me, it comes down to getting better as the race goes along. A lot of times with the 23 team, they would start out a race really strong. They'd run up front and get some stage points, but then they would kind of go the other way as the race moved along, and they didn't do a good job of always getting stage points. That was another thing. Is like come the second stage, they'd slide out a little bit. A lot of times, the speed that they had at the beginning of the race, it wouldn't be there at the end. And all of a sudden, they went from like finishing, oh, it looks like they're going to finish top 5 or so, to, oh, wow, they're on the back half of the top 10 or even outside of the top 10. Richmond comes to mind last year for that. You got to do a better job of that. And you've got to do a better job of staying with the track and the conditions, and that's feedback from the team, the driver. It's the crew chief making the right calls. There has to be better communication there of what you think the track is doing and where you think the track is going, and you can do that. I think they could do well. Bubba has shown that he can win on intermediate racetracks. He's good in short tracks. We know what he can do in super speedways. The road courses, he's better. He's trying to get better on that as well. He ran, a Rolex 24 Support Series race this past weekend to work on that skill set. To me, ultimately this year is going to be defined. It's not about the playoff. Like we know that he's checked that box. It's about winning. It is about winning. If you don't win this year, it is a failed year. You have to win a race this year. You got to make the playoffs. That is the expectation at a minimum.
How different is the narrative? Because, again, watching Full Speed back, you kind of forget how close Bubba came to winning at Texas in the playoffs and ended up finishing third after he got passed, in a late battle for the lead. How different is the narrative for Bubba if he wins Texas in the playoffs, advances,
That's everything. Because the one knock on them last year is, like you said it, they didn't win.
Yeah.
But if he not only did he would have won Texas, I'm looking at it, he led 111 laps last year at that race. Like, he controlled that race. It was very much like Kansas the year before. So you go into a playoff race, you win, you dominate, you win, and you lock yourself into the next round. Like, that's everything. Like, that's the thing, and that's where he has to be. For lack of a better term, you've got to kind of raise your clutchness a little bit, right? Like, when those moments arrive and you've got an opportunity to win, you got to figure out a way to do it. You got to rise to the occasion.
But it's tough with him because I feel like he is, he really thinks about the pressure a lot and can kind of get consumed at times by the pressure. So it's like you don't want to. It's like, yeah, you got to raise in those moments, but you don't want to do it to the point where you work yourself up into like. Too much. It's too much. Like you have to still be able to perform,
And you have there's different ways to handle it, and you've got to find out a way what works best for you. But that is part of this, though, and that's part of big league sports. Is when those moments come, you have to figure out a way to channel it and to execute when the spotlight's on.
I think one thing that I've heard consistently over the years, as sort of a side note here, is like I just feel like the high performing athletes, when you're talking about were you nervous, right? They never say they were nervous because what they were doing is executing what they already know, what they've already practiced. So it's not, the moment is not overwhelming them. Like this recently sort of happened, they were talking to Jared Goff, the Lions quarterback, in the playoffs, right? When he had won that big game in Detroit in front of those frenzied fans. And he was saying he felt like the most comfortable and calm that he had like ever felt in game, despite all this, Detroit was like putting, we want you, they're chanting his name, all this stuff. And that he calmed down. Like, I think to perform at the highest level in some ways, you sort of have to have that state of calmness. Like when you talked to Byron last year, the times that Byron was not performing as well as when he was getting almost rattled. Like at Martinsville, with the heat getting to him, he was getting sort of frustrated and frazzled. It seems like if you can go out and you have enough confidence in your ability to perform at a high level, and you can just go do what you need to do and not let the circumstances affect you, which again is easier said than done. But that seems to be like what the high performing athletes consistently talk about that I hear in interviews. So the more you can do that and just let your sort of instincts and your preparation take over and just say, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. I'm not rattled by this moment. And this just doesn't apply to Bubba, but everybody. Like that seems to be where success comes from in a lot of ways. It's just something I feel like I've heard a lot.